There's a gentleness in you that you've been taught to see as weakness, a softness you've tried to harden, a sensitivity the world has told you is too much, too fragile, too vulnerable to survive. And maybe you've spent years building armor around it, pretending to be stronger than you feel, tougher than you are, less affected than you actually are by this harsh, loud, violent world. But deep in the forest of your psyche, there's a deer, and it's been waiting for you to stop running from your own tenderness. Carl Jung understood something that modern psychology often misses. Our wounds aren't weaknesses to be eliminated. They're doorways to wisdom. The very things we've been taught to hide, to overcome, to transcend, these are often the sources of our deepest gifts. And of all the animals that carry this medicine of transformation through wounding, none speaks more clearly than the deer. The gentle creature who survived by being alert. The vulnerable one who learned to sense danger before it arrives. The soft-hearted being who turned sensitivity into superpower. Today I'm going to show you 3 deer, not just animals. 3 archetypal patterns that live in the collective unconscious. 3 different ways that sensitive souls navigate a world that often feels too harsh, too cruel, too dangerous for hearts like ours. The gentle deer, who carries the medicine of empathy and the wound of being told they're too soft. The wounded deer, who survived trauma and now carries both the scar and the wisdom of that survival. The sacred deer, who found something divine in their vulnerability and became a bridge between worlds. Before you choose, I need you to understand what Jung meant when he talked about the wounded healer archetype. He noticed that the people who became the deepest healers, the most profound helpers, the souls who could sit with others' pain without flinching, they were always people who had been wounded themselves. Not people who had avoided pain. Not people who had transcended suffering. People who had been broken open and learned to live with their hearts exposed. The deer you choose today will show you which kind of wounded healer you are, or which one you're being called to become. So I'm going to ask you to do something that might be uncomfortable. I'm going to ask you to stop performing strength. Stop pretending you're not affected. Stop acting like you're tougher than you actually are. For just a moment, let yourself remember what it feels like to be tender, to be gentle, to be soft in a world of sharp edges. Because the deer that calls to you isn't the one you want to be. It's the one you've been hiding, the one you've been protecting, the one that knows your secret. Beneath all that armor, you're still soft. And that softness isn't your weakness. It's your way home. Look at these 3 deer now. The gentle deer, eyes wide and trusting, carrying an openness that the world hasn't managed to close. The wounded deer, body marked by what it survived, carrying its scars with a quiet dignity that speaks of strength earned through suffering. The sacred deer, luminous and otherworldly, transformed by its wounds into something that belongs to both earth and spirit. Which one makes your chest tighten? Which one feels like looking in a mirror you've been avoiding? Which one knows your name? Choose now, because what you're about to discover isn't comfortable, but it's true. Underscore. If you chose the gentle deer, if your heart went immediately to that soft-eyed creature still carrying innocence in a world that punishes innocence, then Carl Jung would recognize in you what he called the eternal empath, the one who feels everything, who absorbs the world's pain like a sponge absorbs water, who cannot harden their heart no matter how many times it's been broken. You are not weak. You are not naive. You are not broken. You are someone whose sensitivity is so profound that you experience life at an intensity others cannot imagine. Let me tell you who you really are. You are someone who has cried over things other people don't even notice. A sad song, a beautiful sunset, a stranger's loneliness that you can feel from across a crowded room. You are someone who cannot watch violence, even fictional violence, without feeling it in your body. Who cannot ignore suffering, even when ignoring it would be easier. Who cannot walk past pain without wanting to stop and hold it. And the world has told you, again and again, that this is too much, that you're too sensitive, too emotional, too affected by things that shouldn't affect you so deeply. The gentle deer in mythology and psychology represents what Jung called the feeling function at its most developed. Not feelings as in emotions you can't control. Feeling as in a way of knowing the world through empathy, through connection, through sensing what's beneath the surface. You don't just see people. You see into people. You don't just hear words. You hear the pain beneath the words. You don't just exist in the world. You feel the world's heartbeat, and it's often breaking, and you feel that too. Here's what makes you fundamentally different from people who aren't gentle, dear. You cannot not care. Other people can witness suffering and move on, can see cruelty and shrug, can encounter pain and remain unmoved. But you take it in. You carry it. You feel it as if it's your own. And this isn't a choice you make. It's not something you can turn off. It's wired into your nervous system, into your soul, into the very structure of how you process reality. You are a feeling being in a world that values thinking, a soft creature in a culture that worships hardness. Carl Jung believed that empaths aren't broken. They're necessary. They're the ones who remind the world that feeling matters. That tenderness is strength. That vulnerability is courage. In a culture that's become increasingly disconnected, increasingly numb, increasingly cruel, you are the one who refuses to disconnect, who insists on feeling, who won't let the world's harshness turn your heart to stone. That's not weakness. That's an act of defiance. That's revolutionary softness. But let's talk about what this costs you. Because being the gentle deer is exhausting in ways people who aren't empaths cannot comprehend. You walk into a room and immediately feel everyone's emotions. Not think about them. Feel them. As if their sadness is your sadness. Their anxiety is your anxiety. Their anger is your anger. You can't separate your feelings from their feelings. So you're constantly overwhelmed by emotions that aren't even yours, but your body doesn't know that. Your nervous system treats other people's pain as your own emergency. And because you feel so much, you've probably become a caretaker. The person everyone comes to with their problems. The one who listens without judgment. The one who holds space for pain. The one who makes others feel safe because you're so soft, so gentle, so accepting. And you do this willingly, gladly even, because making others feel better is the only thing that makes your own overwhelming sensitivity feel purposeful. If you have to feel everyone's pain anyway, at least you can do something about it. At least you can help. But here's the shadow of the gentle deer that Jung would want you to see. You've learned to use your empathy as a way to avoid yourself. You're so busy feeling everyone else's feelings that you don't have to feel your own. You're so focused on everyone else's pain that you don't have to look at your own. You're so committed to being the gentle, caring, available one that you never have to risk being needy yourself. You've turned your sensitivity into a one-way street. You feel their pain. You hold their suffering. But you don't let anyone hold yours. The shadow of the gentle deer is the martyr. The one who gives and gives and gives until they're empty. Who prides themselves on being strong enough to hold others' pain, but secretly resents that nobody can hold theirs. Who believes that their value lies in their availability, their softness, their willingness to absorb everyone's emotional overflow. And underneath that beautiful empathy, there's a wound. The wound that says, I'm only valuable if I'm useful. I'm only lovable if I'm gentle. I'm only acceptable if I don't make demands. You probably learned very early that your sensitivity was too much. Maybe you were told to stop being so sensitive. Stop crying so much. Stop taking things so personally. Maybe you learned that your big feelings made others uncomfortable, so you started hiding them. Started only showing the gentle, calm, acceptable parts. Started using your empathy to take care of others instead of expressing your own needs. Because when you tried to express your needs, you were told you were too much, too needy, too intense. So you learned to be the giver, never the receiver. The holder, never the held. Here's another shadow. The gentle deer can become so conflict avoidant that they lose themselves entirely. You're so afraid of hurting anyone, of being harsh, of not being gentle enough, that you can't set boundaries. Can't say no. Can't protect yourself when someone's taking advantage of your softness. You let people treat you poorly because calling them out would be confrontational. You stay in situations that hurt you because leaving would hurt them. You betray yourself again and again in the name of being kind. But that's not kindness. That's self-abandonment. Jung would say you're confusing gentleness with weakness, empathy with doormat, sensitivity with inability to have boundaries. The gentle deer in nature isn't defenseless. It can run. It can fight. It can use its alertness to sense danger and escape before harm arrives. But you've forgotten that. You've internalized the message that being gentle means being available to everyone, accepting of everything, unable to defend yourself. and that's killing your spirit. Choosing the gentle deer reveals something about your journey. You're being called to reclaim your gentleness as strength, to see your empathy as power, to understand that feeling deeply isn't a flaw but a profound gift. But you're also being asked to learn something difficult. Gentle people need boundaries more than anyone. Your softness needs protection. Your openness needs discernment. Your empathy needs to be directed consciously instead of spilling out indiscriminately to anyone who demands it. Your path forward, if this is your deer, is learning that you can be gentle and boundaried, empathetic and protected, soft-hearted and strong. You need to understand that setting boundaries isn't cruel. Saying no isn't harsh. Protecting your energy isn't selfish. The gentle deer in the wild knows when to run, knows when someone's not safe, uses its sensitivity not to merge with everyone, but to discern who's safe to be vulnerable with. That's the wisdom your deer is teaching you. You also need to learn to receive, to let others hold you the way you hold them, to express your needs without apologizing, to be as gentle with yourself as you are with everyone else. Jung believed that empaths often have the hardest time with self-compassion. You can feel everyone else's pain, but you're numb to your own. You can give endless understanding to others, but you judge yourself harshly. You need to turn that gentleness inward. Be as soft with yourself as you are with the world. The gentle deer carries profound medicine for a harsh world. Your empathy, your sensitivity, your soft heart, these are exactly what's needed in a culture that's forgotten how to feel. You are living proof that tenderness is powerful, that caring is courageous, that feeling deeply is a form of strength that the hardened world cannot understand. But you must learn to protect your gift, to set boundaries around your empathy, to be gentle with yourself first, so you can be genuinely gentle with others instead of desperately gentle hoping they'll finally be gentle with you. So if this deer called to you, honor your sensitivity. Stop apologizing for feeling deeply. Stop trying to be harder, tougher, less affected. You are a gentle deer in a world that needs gentle beings. But remember, even deer have boundaries. Even soft creatures protect themselves. Even the gentlest heart needs to be guarded by wisdom. Your gentleness is your strength. Now learn to wield it consciously instead of spilling it unconsciously to anyone who asks. Understood. If you chose the wounded deer, if your eyes went to that creature carrying visible scars, body marked by survival, moving with the careful gait of one who's been hurt before, then Carl Jung would see in you what he called the wounded healer. Not someone who's been wounded and transcended it. Someone who's been wounded and integrated it, who carries their scars as wisdom, who knows that healing doesn't mean the wound disappears. It means you learn to live with it, to use it, to let it make you deeper instead of just bitter. Let me tell you who you really are. You are someone who has been through something. Maybe one big thing. Maybe 1,000 small things. Maybe trauma that has a name. Maybe the slow erosion of hope through chronic disappointment. Whatever it was, it changed you. It marked you. And unlike people who can pretend their wounds don't exist, you can't. Your wound is visible, at least to yourself. You carry it with you every day. It affects how you move through the world, how you trust, how you love, how you protect yourself from being hurt again. The wounded deer in Jung's psychology represents what happens when we don't just survive trauma, we metabolize it. We don't just get through it, we're transformed by it. The wound becomes part of our identity, yes, but not in a victimhood way, in a wisdom way. You know things people who haven't been wounded don't know. You see things they can't see. You understand suffering in a way that can only be learned through suffering. And that understanding, Jung would say, that's the beginning of becoming a healer. Here's what makes you different from those who chose the other deer. You don't have the luxury of innocence that the gentle deer still carries. You've seen the shadow side of life. You know that bad things happen to good people. That love doesn't always protect you. That trying your best doesn't guarantee safety. You've learned, through direct, painful experience, that the world isn't safe. And that knowledge lives in your body, in your nervous system, in the way you're always just a little bit braced for the next wound. But here's what others don't understand about the wounded deer. Your hypervigilance isn't paranoia. Your caution isn't weakness. Your difficulty trusting isn't a character flaw. These are intelligent adaptations to having been hurt. Your body learned that danger is real. That harm can come from unexpected places. That letting your guard down is when you get hurt. So your nervous system stays alert, scanning for threats, ready to run or fight or freeze. Not because you're broken, because you're protecting yourself based on what you've learned. Carl Jung believed that wounds that don't heal properly create what he called complexes, autonomous parts of the psyche that take over when triggered. And you probably know this firsthand. You're going along fine, and then something happens, a tone of voice, a situation, a feeling, and suddenly you're not an adult anymore. You're back in the wound. You're that hurt child, that betrayed partner, that abandoned person. The wound takes over, and you react from the wound instead of from your present self. But Jung also believed that wounds that are consciously integrated become sources of power. That the wounded healer is more effective than the unwounded helper precisely because they know suffering from the inside. They don't just have theories about pain. They have experience. They don't just sympathize with hurt. They've been there. And that gives them a depth, a credibility, an ability to sit with others suffering without flinching because they've sat with their own. Now let's talk about the shadow of the wounded deer, because this is where many trauma survivors get stuck. The shadow is identifying so completely with your wound that it becomes your entire identity. You're not just someone who was wounded. You are the wound. Every story you tell is about what happened to you. Every interaction is filtered through your trauma. Every relationship becomes about whether they'll wound you again. You've organized your entire life around your wound. And in doing that, you've given your wound more power than it deserves. Another shadow, using your wound as armor. As an excuse for why you can't do things, can't risk things, can't trust things. I can't be vulnerable because I've been hurt. I can't trust because I've been betrayed. I can't love fully because I've been abandoned. Your wound becomes the reason you don't have to risk being hurt again. And that's understandable. But it's also a prison. You're not protecting yourself. You're isolating yourself. You're letting your wound make all your decisions. There's also the shadow of perpetual victimhood. Not in the sense of making things up, but in the sense of living in the powerless position forever. Bad things happen to you. That's real. But if you're still living as if you're that powerless person, if you haven't reclaimed any agency, any choice, any power, then you're not healing. You're just rehearsing the wound. You're living in the past while calling it honoring your trauma. Jung would ask you, are you healing from your wound? Or are you living in your wound? Are you integrating what happened so it becomes wisdom? Or are you replaying it so it stays fresh? Are you using your experience to help others? Or are you using it to justify why you can't fully live? Because there's a massive difference between honoring your trauma and being enslaved by it. Between carrying your wound as part of your story and making your wound your entire story. Choosing the wounded deer reveals where you are in your healing journey. Maybe you're early in it, still raw from what happened, still trying to make sense of pain that doesn't make sense. Maybe you're in the middle, doing the hard work of integration, learning to live with a wound that won't fully close. Or maybe you're on the other side, discovering that your wound has made you wiser, deeper, more compassionate than you would have been without it. Each stage is valid. Each stage is part of the journey. Your path forward, if this is your deer, is moving from wound to wisdom, from victim to survivor to thriver, from being controlled by your trauma to consciously working with it. This doesn't mean the wound disappears. The wounded deer still has its scars, but those scars tell a story of survival, of resilience, of strength that was earned through suffering. Jung believed that it's not the wound that defines us, but what we do with the wound. Whether we let it close us or crack us open, whether it makes us bitter or deep. You need to learn to separate your wound from your identity. Yes, something bad happened to you. Yes, it changed you. Yes, you carry the effects of it. But you are not only your wound. You're also your strength, your survival, your resilience, your capacity to keep going even when you're hurt, your ability to stay soft even though you've been broken. That's who you are. Not just what happened to you, but how you responded to what happened. You also need to learn that hypervigilance, while it protected you then, might be imprisoning you now. Your nervous system learned to be alert because danger was real. But if you're still living in that alert state when the danger has passed, you're traumatizing yourself again and again. You're never resting, never feeling safe, never letting your guard down, even in moments that are actually safe. That's not protection anymore. That's exhaustion. You need to learn, slowly and gently, to teach your body that not every moment is dangerous, that safety can exist, that you can rest. The wounded deer carries the medicine of depth earned through suffering. Your wound has given you empathy for others' pain, compassion for human fragility, understanding of why people make choices that seem incomprehensible to those who haven't been hurt the same way. You can sit with someone in their darkness without trying to fix them or rush them because you know darkness intimately. You've been there. You know there's no quick way through. Only through. That's the gift your wound has given you. But you must be careful not to wear your wound as a badge, not to use it to feel special or deeper or more real than people who haven't been hurt the same way. Jung warned against this. The wounded healer who becomes identified with being wounded isn't helping anyone, including themselves. Your wound is part of your story. It's not your only story. You're also the person who survived it, who kept going, who's still here despite everything. That's the story worth telling. So if this deer called to you, honor what you've survived. Acknowledge that you've been hurt and that hurt was real. But then ask yourself, am I healing or am I rehearsing? Am I integrating or am I identifying? Am I using my wound as wisdom or as armor? Because your wound can be your greatest teacher if you let it. But it can also be your greatest prison if you're not careful. The wounded deer knows how to walk with its scars. It doesn't pretend they're not there. But it doesn't let them stop it from moving through the forest, from being alive, from finding moments of peace despite what it's been through. That's your path. That's your healing. That's what it means to transform wound into wisdom. Underscore if you chose the sacred deer, if your eyes went to that luminous creature that seems to exist between worlds, carrying an otherworldly grace, moving as if it's being guided by something invisible, then Carl Jung would recognize in you what he called the mystic archetype. The one whose wound opened them to the spiritual realm. The one whose suffering cracked them open so completely that something divine came through. The one who didn't just survive their pain. They were transformed by it into something that belongs as much to spirit as to earth. Let me tell you who you really are. You are someone whose pain was so profound that it couldn't be contained in the material world alone. It broke through the membrane between the physical and the spiritual. It forced you to ask questions that have no earthly answers. Why do we suffer? What is the meaning of pain? What survives when everything falls apart? And in asking those questions, in sitting with that unbearable not knowing, something opened in you. A door to something larger. Something that can only be called sacred. The sacred deer in mythology represents the threshold animal, the one that guides souls between worlds. In Celtic tradition, the white stag leads seekers into the other world. In Buddhism, the deer represents the Buddha's first teaching. In shamanic traditions, the deer is a power animal that helps navigate between ordinary and non-ordinary reality. Choosing this deer suggests you've been through something that destroyed your ordinary understanding of reality and forced you to find meaning in the extraordinary. Here's what makes you fundamentally different from those who chose the other deer. Your suffering wasn't just personal. It was existential. It didn't just hurt your body or your emotions. It shattered your entire worldview. It destroyed your understanding of how life works. It killed your innocence about the nature of reality. And in that destruction, in that dark night of everything falling apart, you found something. Not answers, but presence. Not certainty, but connection to something vast and mysterious that held you when nothing else could. Carl Jung called this kind of experience numinous, an encounter with the sacred that can't be explained but can't be denied. It happens when normal consciousness fails, when our usual ways of making sense of life collapse, when we're brought to our knees by suffering so total that we have nowhere left to turn but inward, or upward, or beyond. And there, in that place of complete surrender, something meets us. Something Jung called the self with a capital S, something others call God. Something that doesn't need a name to be real. You probably can't explain what happened to you in rational terms. You can tell the story of your suffering, the events, the losses, the pain, but you can't explain how you got through it, how you're still here, what held you when everything fell apart. You just know that something did. Something invisible but utterly real. Something that transformed your wound from trauma into initiation, from suffering into sacred teaching, from breaking into breaking open. But let's talk about the shadow of the sacred deer, because this archetype carries dangerous temptations. The first shadow is spiritual bypassing, using your spiritual awakening to avoid dealing with your actual wounds. Talking about how everything happens for a reason to avoid feeling your grief. Saying you're grateful for your suffering to avoid acknowledging how much it hurt. Claiming you've transcended pain when you've just dissociated from it. Jung warned that spirituality can become another defense mechanism, another way to avoid the difficult work of being human. Another shadow, believing that because you've had spiritual experiences, you're somehow more evolved than people who haven't. Using your sacred deer nature to feel special. Looking down on people who are still stuck in ego or haven't awakened yet. That's not spiritual maturity. That's spiritual ego. The truly sacred person doesn't need to announce their sacredness. They don't use their spiritual experiences to create separation. They use them to recognize the sacred in everyone. There's also the shadow of not returning to earth. The sacred deer can become so enchanted with the other world that it forgets it has a body, responsibilities, relationships in this world. Spending all your time meditating, channeling, exploring consciousness while your actual life falls apart. That's not enlightenment. That's escapism dressed in spiritual clothing. Jung believed the goal wasn't to transcend the human realm, but to bring spirit fully into it. To incarnate the sacred. To embody wisdom. Not to escape embodiment, but to make embodiment sacred. You may also struggle with what Jung called the inflation of the psyche. After profound spiritual experiences, it's tempting to identify with the experience rather than integrate it. To think, I am enlightened, rather than, I had an experience of enlightenment. To believe you've arrived rather than recognizing you've simply had a glimpse. The sacred deer shadow thinks it's special because it's touched the divine. The integrated sacred deer knows that touching the divine revealed that everything is divine, including the ordinary, the wounded, the earthly. Choosing the sacred deer reveals something about your spiritual journey. Perhaps your suffering forced you to seek meaning beyond conventional religion, beyond cultural explanations, beyond anything that didn't match the depth of what you'd experienced. Perhaps you've been walking a mystical path for years, using various practices to stay connected to that sacred presence you first encountered in your darkest moment. Or perhaps you're just beginning to realize that your wound opened a door you didn't know existed, and you're being called to walk through it. Your path forward, if this is your deer, is learning to be sacred and human simultaneously, to touch the divine and wash the dishes, to have mystical experiences and pay your bills, to access transcendent states and maintain intimate relationships. Jung called this the integration of the spiritual with the psychological. It's not enough to have spiritual experiences. You have to bring those experiences back to earth, to let them change how you actually live, how you actually treat people, how you actually move through your ordinary days. You need to be careful that your spiritual path doesn't become another way to avoid intimacy. Sacred deer types often struggle with relationships because human messiness feels less appealing than spiritual transcendence. Conflict feels lower vibrational than meditation. Other people's needs feel like they're pulling you away from your spiritual practice. But Jung would say that relationships are the spiritual practice. That love, conflict, compromise, vulnerability, these are where you actually embody what you learned in the other world. You also need to learn that spiritual experiences don't make you special. They make you responsible. Responsible for bringing back what you learned. Responsible for using your wisdom to help, not to separate. Responsible for living your spirituality, not just performing it. The sacred deer that stays in the other world is useless to the this world. But the sacred deer that moves between worlds, that brings medicine back, that helps others cross the threshold between suffering and meaning, that's the true mystic. That's the wounded healer at its highest expression. The sacred deer carries the medicine of meaning-making through suffering. Your pain wasn't just personal tragedy. It was initiation. It destroyed your old self so a deeper self could emerge. It shattered your worldview so a more truthful worldview could form. It brought you to the edge of what you could handle so you could discover what's beyond that edge. And now you carry that knowledge, that direct experience of something that holds us even when everything falls apart. That's profound medicine in a world that's lost its connection to the sacred. But you must be careful not to become untethered, not to lose your humanity in your pursuit of spirituality. not to use your connection to the other world as an excuse to check out of this world. Jung believed that the most spiritually mature people weren't the ones who had the most dramatic experiences. They were the ones who could be ordinary with extraordinary presence, who could do the dishes with full consciousness, who could be with another human being without needing them to be spiritual, who could live a normal life while carrying sacred awareness. That's the goal, not to escape Earth for heaven, but to recognize that Earth is heaven when you have the eyes to see it. So if this deer called to you, honor the sacred opening that came through your wound. Honor the spiritual experiences that found you when everything else fell away. Honor the meaning you've discovered in the meaningless, but then bring it down to earth. Embody it. Live it. Let your spirituality make you more human, not less. Let your sacred nature make you more present, not more distant. Let your otherworldly awareness help you navigate this world with more grace, more compassion, more wisdom. The sacred deer's gift isn't that it can leave the forest. It's that it can see the sacred in the forest. That's what you're here to do. Not to escape, but to reveal the sacred that's been here all along, waiting to be seen. Underscore. Now you've chosen your deer. You've seen what it reveals about your sensitivity, your wounds, your path. But Carl Jung wants you to understand something essential before we close this journey. You are not just one deer. You are all three deer. The gentle deer, the wounded deer, the sacred deer, they all move through the forest of your psyche. What you chose today simply shows which deer needs your attention most right now. Which aspect of your sensitive nature is calling for recognition? Which way of carrying your tenderness needs to be honored or healed or integrated more fully? Jung's work was always about wholeness, not perfection, not becoming one thing, but integrating all the parts. The person who can be gentle and boundaried, who can carry wounds without being defined by them, who can access the sacred without abandoning the earthly. That's what these three deer are teaching you. Not to choose one way of being, but to learn from all three. To let each deer show you what you need to know. The gentle deer teaches you that sensitivity is strength, that empathy is a gift, that feeling deeply isn't a flaw but a profound way of knowing the world. But it also warns you that gentleness without boundaries becomes self-abandonment, that empathy without discernment becomes depletion, that being soft doesn't mean being available to everyone's pain. You need to protect your gentleness. Guard your soft heart. Use your sensitivity consciously instead of spilling it unconsciously. The wounded deer teaches you that pain can become wisdom, that scars tell stories of survival, that being broken doesn't mean being destroyed, that healing isn't about erasing your wounds but learning to live with them, to use them, to let them make you deeper. But it also warns you against identifying with your wounds so completely that you become it, against living in victim consciousness, against using your trauma as armor against living fully. Your wound is part of your story, not your whole story. The sacred deer teaches you that suffering can be initiation, that being cracked open can reveal something divine, that the worst moments of your life can become doorways to the most profound, that pain, when met with consciousness, can transform you into something that bridges worlds. But it also warns you against spiritual bypassing, against using otherworldly experiences to avoid this worldly responsibilities, against believing that spirituality makes you special. The sacred isn't somewhere else. It's here, in your ordinary life, in your relationships, in how you treat the person in front of you. You need all three: the gentleness to feel, the strength to survive, the wisdom to find meaning. If you only have the gentle deer, you'll be sensitive but defenseless. If you only have the wounded deer, you'll be strong but imprisoned by your past. If you only have the sacred deer, you'll be spiritual but ungrounded. But when you integrate all three, when you can be soft and strong and sacred simultaneously, you become whole. You become the embodiment of what Jung meant by the individuated self. So I invite you to reflect deeply now. Which deer called to you most strongly? Was it the gentle deer with its reminder that sensitivity is power? Was it the wounded deer with its teaching that pain can become wisdom? Was it the sacred deer with its promise that suffering can be sacred? And what is your deer trying to tell you? What aspect of your tender nature needs attention? What wound needs integration? What sacred knowing needs to be embodied? But don't stop there. Ask yourself about the other deer too. What can you learn from the deer you didn't choose? If you chose the gentle deer, what would the wounded deer teach you about protecting yourself? What would the sacred deer teach you about finding meaning in your sensitivity? If you chose the wounded deer, what would the gentle deer teach you about staying soft? What would the sacred deer teach you about transforming your pain? If you chose the sacred deer, what would the gentle deer teach you about staying human? What would the wounded deer teach you about staying grounded in your actual experience? Because the path of integration requires all three deer. It requires you to honor your sensitivity while setting boundaries, to carry your wounds while not being controlled by them, to access the sacred while remaining firmly planted on earth. That's not easy work. Most people never do it. Most people either harden themselves against sensitivity entirely, or they stay so undefended that the world destroys them. But you're here. You've chosen a deer. You've started looking at these patterns. That means you're ready for this work. Ready to be gentle and strong, wounded and wise, sacred and human, all at once. Comment below which deer chose you. Tell me what resonated. Tell me what your deer revealed that you've been avoiding. Tell me what work your deer is calling you to do. Because this is how we heal, not alone, but together. Not by pretending our sensitivity is easy, but by acknowledging how hard it is to be tender in a harsh world. Not by hiding our wounds, but by learning to carry them with dignity. Not by escaping to the spiritual realm, but by bringing the sacred into the ordinary. We're all deer, gentle and wounded and sacred, walking through a forest that's often dangerous, but walking together. And that makes all the difference. If this journey spoke to you, if you felt seen by your deer's description, if something in you recognized itself in these patterns, then support this work. Leave a like so others can find it. Subscribe to continue exploring the depths of Jung's psychology and your own psyche. Share this with someone whose gentleness you admire, whose wounds you recognize, whose sacred nature you see. Sometimes the message someone needs most comes in the form of a deer stepping quietly through their awareness, reminding them that their sensitivity isn't a weakness. It's a way home. Thank you for walking this path with me. Thank you for being brave enough to look at your own tenderness without armor. Thank you for honoring the deer within you instead of trying to kill it to survive. The world needs sensitive souls, wounded healers, sacred bridges between worlds. The world needs your gentleness, your wisdom, your depth. The world needs deer, and you're one of them. So walk gently. Carry your wounds with dignity. Touch the sacred and bring it back to earth. That's your path. That's your medicine. That's what it means to be the deer you chose today. The forest is waiting. Your tenderness is needed. Your wounds have wisdom. Your sacredness is real. The only question left is, will you honor the deer you are? Will you stop trying to be a wolf or a horse or anything harder than you actually are? Will you let yourself be soft in a hard world, wounded in a culture that demands invulnerability, sacred in a society that's forgotten the divine? That's the invitation. That's the call. The deer knows who you are. Will you finally admit it too?